Republicans by law on odds over infrastructure as voting methods. Washington business groups and some Republicans in the Senate, working across the board with Republican leaders in Congress, have put in place an all-inclusive effort to secure GOP votes for a two-part infrastructure proposal ahead of a final vote Thursday. Although the measure is the result of a compromise among moderates on both sides, the House's Republican leaders are leaning on their members to reject the $1 trillion infrastructure bill by belittling its content and arguing that it will only pave the way for Democrats to push through their far greater climate change and social policy bills. Their opposition has put pressure on President Nancy Pelosi, who has threatened the more progressive members of her Democratic Assembly with withholding their support for the infrastructure package until Congress deals with the broader bill. If Republicans unite in opposition, Mrs. Pelosi can afford to lose as few as 3 Democrats on the bill. But some Republican senators who helped draft the bill, along with influential business groups that support it, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable, have launched a counterattack to try to persuade House Republicans to back the legislation. "It's a good bill, it's right there for the country, so I urge Republicans to support it," said Senator Rob Portman, a Republican in Ohio and one of the bill's negotiators who said he worked the phones hard. "It's a good bill, it's right there for the country, so I urge Republicans to support it." How the conflicting press campaigns play out can determine the fate of the infrastructure bill. On Tuesday, the Liberal Democrats accused Mrs. Pelosi of treason for giving up her promise that Parliament would only pass infrastructure law after the Senate had secured the adoption of the major measure. While Democratic leaders are working hard to secure as many of the liberal votes as possible, they know that the House Republicans must resign. "I would say the bill is likely to be passed, but it's going to be a bias," Neil Bradley, a vice president and political chief of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce who once worked for the House Republican leadership, said on Tuesday. Representative Steve Scalise, a Republican in Louisiana who is running his party's vote-pressing operation in Parliament, is closely following which Republicans intend to vote for the infrastructure proposal. "We are working to keep that number as low as we possibly can," he said. A couple of House Republicans who are members of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus have announced their support for the measure, including Representatives Tom Reed of New York, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania and Don Bacon of Nebraska. On Monday, Representative Don Young of Alaska, the longest-serving member of the House, announced his support a passionate speech on the floor of the House. Moderate Democrats say others could follow suit, perhaps as many as 20 Republican votes, if Pelosi can win over enough liberals to keep it close. But with a Thursday mood threatening, time is running out. Representative Peter Meijer, a New Year's Republican from Michigan, said he had heard from Republicans on both sides, but when asked if it would be better for both bills to pass or both fail, "Consensus is better, both fail. Consensus is better, both fail," he said. The infrastructure bill is an unusual phenomenon in a highly polarized Congress, a truly two-pronged and significant bill, hammered out by Democrats and Republicans, before passing the Senate last month by 69 votes, 19 of them Republicans, including Minority Leader Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. With $550 billion in new federal spending, the measure would provide $65 billion to expand high-speed internet access, $110 billion for roads, bridges and other projects, $25 billion to airports, and the largest funding for Amtrak since the passenger train service was founded in 1971. It will also renew existing infrastructure and transportation programs that expire on Friday. But because House Democratic leaders have at least verbally wrapped it up in a major $3.5 trillion climate change and social policy bill, it has been caught up in the policies of this measure, and broader Republican efforts to thwart President Biden's agenda. Sir. Scalise put it in the highest sense on Tuesday, "This week we are going to see an epic battle between free market capitalism and big government socialism. That's what's at stake." As Democrats publicly debate Mr. Biden's agenda, senior Republicans have little interest in getting their guarantor, Mrs. Pelosi, out of her predicament. The legislative crisis that lies ahead of her is one of her own creations that she needs the progressives to save her from, said Ms. Jerry Missouri, the senior Republican on the House Budget Committee. Supporters of the infrastructure proposal are trying to remain aware of the merits of the bill, not the broader policy. "It's true, people have rhetorically linked the two, but they really are not," Bradley said. "It's true, people have rhetorically linked the two, but they really are not." And they argue that the Republicans in the House are making the wrong political calculation about the infrastructure measure. GOP leaders have warned that the bill is a Trojan horse whose passage would only increase the chances that the Democrats pass the more expensive plan, which Mr. Biden calls his Build Back Better agenda, which is packed with extensions of social safety net programs, initiatives to combat climate change and tax increases on businesses and the wealthy. "I just think that is not correct," said Mr. Portman. Instead, some proponents of the infrastructure measure see its passage as a potential setback for the larger plan. They argue that the adoption of the infrastructure bill could destroy progressives by their leverage to dictate the terms of the more ambitious and expensive piece of their agenda. Joshua Bolten, a former White House chief of staff for George W. Bush, president of the Business Roundtable, said the top executive's organization was pushing to get the bill passed, running radio and social media ads in Republican districts and pushing for meetings with legislators. "It's a really good bill. It is urgently needed. It will have a dramatic effect on the productivity of the U.S. economy. It's a really good investment," he said on Tuesday. "It's a really good bill. It is urgently needed. It will have a dramatic effect on the productivity of the U.S. economy. It's a really good investment." Senator Mitt Romney, a Republican in Utah, said he had lobbied every member of his state's delegation to support the measure. "I cannot predict where they will end up, but I certainly urge people to consider the benefits of the bill as opposed to worrying about what external observers have to say," he said. In this case, it seems that the Republican leaders in the House seem to be following the pressure from conservative groups who have reduced the infrastructure bill as swollen with expenses that go far beyond the stated purpose. And they predict that moderate Democrats who have pushed for its adoption will be angry enough over its death that they will retaliate by bringing down the social policy bill. This is a desperate administration looking for a victory to distract Americans from the crises caused by Biden, both at home and abroad, while opening the floodgates for trillions more in future spending, said Representative Beth Van Duyn, Republicans of Texas. Supporters of the larger bill see an alternative political cause and effect. The most liberal MPs have long warned that once the infrastructure bill is passed, moderate to conservative Democrats will peel away from the larger bill that has already secured their priority. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, another Republican supporter of the infrastructure plan, said the significance of the bill went beyond roads, bridges and railroads. "It is not only the benefits of the policy we are launching and the building of the necessary infrastructure, it is also the message that is being sent that at a time when so much is dysfunctional in Congress, you can build bipartisan initiatives that will be sustained," she said, adding, "It is not only the benefits of the policy we are launching and the building of the necessary infrastructure, it is also the message that is being sent that at a time when so much is dysfunctional in Congress, you can build bipartisan initiatives that will be sustained."